Yeah, hello. There'll be more on kisses too, I can assure you. So there's the title. It's a bit of a stretch, but you'll see it really relates in the end to public space. Next slide, I guess I do. Here we are 40 years ago, Harrison and I giving a workshop on passive solar. And if you look closely, those charts on the wall are the psychometric charts, which are about actually human comfort in buildings. But we're going to talk about human comfort outside of buildings today. Climate change, arguably the biggest challenge facing humanity, maybe ever. It's qualitatively different than other challenges we've had in the past. It's different than human poverty. It's different than injustice. We've had those. Those are chronic problems. This is a different kind of problem. The others have been with us since our beginnings. Climate change has been with us too, but it hasn't been as fast or as disruptive as it is right now. We have almost perfect climatic conditions for humans to thrive. And we've had that prospering summer climate for about 10,000 years, the so-called Holocene age. The climate's been about as good as it gets for our species. It has been the big kiss, and a very long and a very slow one. We've come to take this gentle climate for granted because we haven't experienced anything else for the last 10,000 years. Benign conditions for 400 generations have allowed us to develop farming and ultimately cities, including public life and public spaces. Indeed, we have taken great advantage of these very favorable conditions, using everything that climate provides. We have built some magnificent human settlements and cities, as you know, and some wonderful urban places. Contemporary science so begs this very profound question. Is this long, halcyon summer ending? Is climate, the big alpha driver, I would argue, of human history, starting to reach dangerous tipping points? 95% of climate scientists would say yes. The planet itself, physically, will do very well. We know that. It's been through far, far bigger changes. But will our species continue to grow in number and in dominion? Or will our newly emerging Anthropocene age be a brief footnote? And what the hell does this have to do with public spaces? The problem is, of course, how can we mortals wrap our heads around this unwieldy, complex, and relatively slow-moving thing we call climate change? We're hardwired to deal with more pressing problems, especially ones with palpable and personal immediacy. We need to find and develop ways to motivate people to be climate smart and climate ready. Can public space play a role? If so, how? So here are some thoughts on human motivation. There seem to be three basic, we can go to the next slide, I guess. Oh, I do that. Sorry. We've already talked about that. Human motivation. There seem to be three basic drivers: pleasure, fear, guilt. Pretty universal. Sometimes they're called carrots, sticks, and hot potatoes. There are other less dramatic emotions and feelings that move us to act as well. There's safety, there's comfort, there's health, there's security, both physical and psychological. And they're the perennial pocketbook issues. It seems that almost all consumers, everyone in this room would be included, whether you're rich or poor or in between, want to get the most mileage out of their own money, regardless of whether they're fiscal conservatives or fiscal liberals at the government scale. Self-interest, not self-sacrifice, is what usually induces behavioral change. We also know that there's competition and status seeking, peer pressure, and so on. And nothing lubricates reform better than shared fun and shared humor, including the ability to laugh, particularly at ourselves. We should all laugh at ourselves. There are many motivators offered by problems around the world. Climate change is not the only one, God knows. There's a long, long list. Urban air pollution and vehicle congestion to health problems and infrastructure, particularly infrastructure to deal with sea level rise in places like Indonesia. Stormwater flooding everywhere. There are plenty of issues, plenty of challenges. But the particular cocktail of concerns varies from place to place and climate to climate. culture to culture, and economy to economy. For many places, especially those in hot and humid climates, extreme heat is intensifying. The UHIE, the urban heat island, I think that might be the next one. No? Yeah, there it is. Either UHIE or just UHI, the urban heat island, is raising temperature and discomfort faster and more immediately and more palpably than climate change, making trouble sooner, especially in local places, urban locales. The denser, the worse. And because hotter temperatures impact not just the poor, but also marginal urban areas, it doesn't just impact the poor, it doesn't impact just the inner city, it impacts all areas of the city. And because heat waves kill more people than all other natural disasters put together, that's everything from, horrible earthquakes to flooding to you name it, UHI's impact will be widely felt, especially out of doors in public spaces. In any case, whatever the motivator, climatologists tell us we have no time to waste. So what is the urban heat island effect? UHIE or UHI are easily confused with climate change. They are not the same thing. Urban heat island and climate change are not the same physics. There's a lot of overlap, but there's some consequential difference. Climate change is the result in changes in the composition of the atmosphere, which slowly increases the average land and ocean temperatures. It's a global phenomenon. Urban heat island is a local phenomenon. It's not the greenhouse effect. It is not the greenhouse effect. Climatologists don't pay so much attention to it because over the whole planet, it sort of works itself out. But we care immensely about it because this is where people live, where the UHI is. The increase in local temperatures is not about greenhouse gases trapping heat in the atmosphere. It's about a local increase in sensible heat. Sensible heat is different. It's just plain hot air and hot gases from tailpipes, chimneys, and radiant heat from dark surfaces, like dark rooftops, streets, parking lots, and so on, that have been heated up by the sun. Public spaces are major contributors. These heat sources raise the average urban temperature higher than surrounding suburbs in the rural countryside, as you know, because they have fewer tailpipes and chimneys and dark surfaces per acre in the countryside. The rural to urban temperature difference can be 3 to 4 degrees Celsius or higher, and during heat waves, much higher, the delta can be quite extreme. Cities like Atlanta in the U.S. have experienced more climate change from UHI than from CC. The hotter temperatures, amplified by UHI, will soon make outdoor activities, quote, too uncomfortable for more than a few hours a day in that city, according to Brian Stone, a real expert on UHI. It's diminishing public life in public spaces, even though that city's not famous for that. NASA-funded research suggests that the number of high-stress heat days in a long list of American cities, and I'm sure this would apply to European cities and other cities on continents that you represent, will have 5 to 9 times as many heat stress days by 2050 and 18 to 33 as many heat stress days by 2100. This does not bode well for public spaces, folks, especially for our lower income and elderly citizens who are going to get hit hardest. The temperature chart on the right happens to be LA. Projected 10-fold increase in heat-related deaths by 2057, says the Rollins School of Public Health. Heat is the most widespread climate threat, hits hardest the low income and the elderly. And as someone has said, and we'll hear again, sustainability without social equity is not sustainable. So why are heat islands paradoxically timely and actually helpful, which is my argument? UHI is a huge opportunity. It is a burden as well, but I want to talk about the fortuitous opportunity. Very fortunately, the ways to mitigate and adapt to UHI are almost identical to ways to address global climate change, even though they're different phenomenon. This is extremely lucky. If they were opposite, working in opposite directions, we'd be in big trouble. And importantly, it's a 5 to a 10-year problem, not a 50 to a 100-year problem. So it can more effectively and immediately motivate people to modify their negative behaviors. They're much more concrete, manageable, and quicker feedback loops. And they require quick attention, both adaptive and mitigative. And because adaptation tends to feel more proactive, more direct, and sort of more satisfying than mitigating longer term and less certain effects of climate change, it's arguably more satisfying. And because UHI can threaten human health, our actual health, it's a particularly personal and strong stimulant to sort of galvanize action. As is well known, urban residents compared to their suburban counterparts, this group knows it as well as anyone, have smaller carbon footprints and smaller eco footprints than their rural or suburban counterparts. You know what the eco footprint is. It's not only the ability to support these people's lifestyles in terms of resources, but also to absorb their waste. Mainly because urbanites walk, bike, and use transit more than their suburban and rural counterparts, and the more compact, party wall, multi-floor, larger buildings usually take less energy to mechanically heat and cool. So it's a double positive living in cities. It's not just transportation. I call it the environmental paradox of cities. It's especially pronounced in America and in other wealthy countries because suburban lifestyles are exceptionally consumptive and waste-producing there. So any policy that induces more people to migrate to the city is a positive one, in my opinion. It's a positive step towards reducing climate change. Not every city, but almost every city. There are a few exceptions, not time to discuss. On the other hand, if cities are known to be getting hotter than their rural and suburban surrounding hinterland, it's a disincentive to move to the city, even a reason to move out of the city. Therefore, it's not just a perceptual problem, it's a real problem that we have to deal with sooner or later. The sooner the better. And as I said, and we'll say again, urban cooling, while you're implementing urban cooling strategies, you are dealing with global climate change. And with a lot less political rigmarole or religious hullabaloo that we have in many parts of the world, like the United States. I mean, this shows you not only the decrease in transportation between the low-density bar on the top and the high-density on the bottom. Red is transportation, but building operations. That's heating, cooling, and lighting. And the materials, the embodied energy in the materials is considerably less. This is the environmental paradox of cities, and thank God for it. It's on our side. So what are some strategies? How do we relate this to public space? There are three ways, at least three basic ways to deal with our cities. Harrison will show two additional ones. The first is increasing albedo. Albedo is, I guess, Latin. It's about the solar reflectivity, how bright and reflective the surfaces are in a city. It indicates actually a percentage of solar radiation, the solar reflectivity index. It talks about the amount of sunlight that's immediately bounced right back to outer space. It doesn't make the dreaded photothermal conversion from light to heat, from shortwave radiation to longwave radiation. It comes in as shortwave, it goes back out. It's like it never arrived. It's in some ways a better strategy than reducing greenhouse gas production, but we have to do both. It's significant because solar energy that hits light-colored surfaces, I already said that. In other words, the solar energy enters and immediately leaves our planet without heating it up, passing directly through the atmosphere and those dreaded greenhouse gases. Accordingly, light-colored horizontal surfaces, primarily roofs and pavement, increase the urban albedo and reduce the ambient air temperature. Converting half a city's rooftops, it's estimated can diminish urban temperatures up to 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Sales of sunglasses, though, will skyrocket. Obviously, paved street and road surfaces, which tend to be dark-colored, often asphalt. In the developing world, it might be gravel, which is actually better. It's a lighter color. But the dark asphalt absorbs solar radiation and heats the air temperature around it. The surface devoted to vehicles in motion, streets, can be immense, we know that, but we often forget about paved parking areas for vehicles at rest. In some cities, the combination of the two, which a student of mine dubbed motorized space, is a very high percentage of land area. In Detroit, if you add up parking and buildings, it's about 60% of the city's land area. You can see some large parking lots that are actually darker than they appear in this slide. Both areas can be literally lightened up with paint, literally paint, made all the more timely by some very interesting cost breakthroughs in durable pavement paintings and coatings, which could be applied by very low-skilled labor, by volunteer labor. It is a tactical urbanist dream. I'm sorry you can't hear my gliding upstairs, but thank you for being here. In my case, you can see how severe it is. University of Michigan is 45 minutes from Detroit. The paved area around Houston, or in downtown Houston, so embarrassed the city that they've since built in this area 2 or 3 sports arenas and other major venues. They were literally embarrassed into doing it. This photo became a sort of poster child of excessive paving. Light reflective surfaces, especially horizontal ones, which most pavement is, and roofs, are very effective ways to bounce back the solar radiation before it heats up the air. So, most reflective surfaces, especially horizontal ones, very effective. As you can see, there's a huge difference, 10% to 40%, not trivial. Rooftops, 20 to 80%. Here's some students painting a white roof in New York. Just painting, half the roofs has a big impact. It's very cheap. And while you're at it, you might as well add some solar collectors. We just added these to our condo rooftop last week, and you can see we have a very white roof, which didn't cost any more than a black roof. It's sort of a no-brainer. The second strategy is sensible heat you can feel, and its reduction. This is simply less hot air, less hot gases. This means less combustion in motor vehicles, power plants, and industrial processes. That's what we new urbanists and many others in the room are all about. A significant percentage of these anthropogenic sources of UHI are vehicle traffic. Good, walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented urbanism is a well-known way to reduce heat from tailpipes. If you're lucky, you can do your walk score, your bike score, and your transit score in a matter of a few minutes at walkscore.com. These are all very relevant, and indeed, even the mavens of Wall Street, now the first thing they check when they're looking into real estate investment trusts is what the walk score is. It's that pervasive. Cities with mixed-use development on smaller blocks, close-grained jobs, housing balance, others have talked about that, and good public realms that encourage walking are essential. Last, utilizing lower technology cooling and dehumidification systems. Air conditioners, as you know, if you've ever been around the outside component, pump voluminous amounts of hot air into the air shed. And we know, as the developing world can increasingly afford these energy-intensive systems, they will tend to use them. The third strategy is a lot of fun to talk about. It's about cool microclimates within the city, achieved primarily with vegetation, especially shade trees. The great multitaskers of the environment. You can't say enough about trees. Whether they're along streets or roadways or in parking lots, they are particularly effective as a canopy. It's a long list of, I'm up to 10 or 11 benefits. There are even more, but they provide cool shade. They evapotranspire, which cools the air and moistens the air. They sequester carbon. They clean particulate pollution matter. Pollution in the air. They retain soil, they retain water, they provide animal habitats, they provide nuts, fruits, flowers, fragrance, they absorb sound, they bestow beauty and biophilic presence. They are a godsend, literally. And every culture seems to love trees. Every culture seems to love dappled light, which trees filter, and it's probably because we all evolved along the savanna's edge in East Africa, looking out from that dappled light for both food and danger, in the famous prospect refuge argument about our evolution. Urban street trees, like you see here in Buenos Aires, often grow larger. They have bigger canopy spread because they have less competition from other trees than in the countryside or in the woods. Accordingly, a really healthy urban tree, say the London plane tree, which is particularly tolerant, has many times the cooling capacity of a forest tree. I've heard very high multipliers, too. I'm embarrassed to quote how high they are. You also know a lot about green living walls and green roofs. Well, they're good, but they're not anywhere near as cost effective as trees. They're much more expensive to install and maintain and to water and so on. So they're not as cost effective. It's hard to beat trees. In hot, arid climates, water fountains and pools, as you know, can cool the air by evaporation. Other good things about trees. They are known to increase real estate values, at least in the parts of the world that I'm familiar with. Tree-lined streets and neighborhoods are always more expensive. They've been shown to decrease crime in cities like Baltimore. Trees and other vegetation can also decrease mental fatigue. You've heard about improving, job performance and reducing stress, reducing feelings of anger, depression, anxiety, and so on. They're our friend on many, many levels. And unlike infrastructure, which begins to degrade and lose value the moment it's installed, a tree increases in size and value for decades after it's been planted. There are a few negative externalities. There's increased water demand, which is an issue in some parts of the world. There are increased maintenance costs. There's leaf removal in some places. That's an issue. Root damage to sidewalks. For those of you who bike on sidewalks or walk, you know about that. There are allergies, perhaps, that are exacerbated. Resistance from some residents who don't want trees. There are some residents who just don't want trees in front of their homes. And vegetation arguably does provide cover for criminals in some cases. Not so much trees, but shrubs. Many cities have lost their forested areas. I think Harrison's going to show you some slides about Atlanta, which has lost half its tree cover in the last quarter century. Seattle's lost a third. I only know these American cities for a statistical decrease. But studies have shown that recovering Atlanta's original tree cover could lower air temperatures in Atlanta on the hottest days, not every day, on the hottest days, about 12 degrees Fahrenheit, and even more during heat waves. Harrison will say more about that. There are 135 American cities that keep an official tree inventory, and they have planning and maintenance programs. Almost half of them have adopted goals for the size of their tree canopy. Many trees are being planted in public plazas and along public streets, roads, sidewalks, biking, walking paths, you name it, where they enhance public life. By the way, we hear a lot about decarbonizing our economy, producing as much energy with less carbon, being more efficient, decarbonizing it. In some ways, we want to recarbonize the environment. This is about recarbonizing it. Trees are about carbon in a positive way. So we need to both decarbonize our energy and resource systems while recarbonizing our urban environments. So these are the three strategies in review. They're really achievable. They're understandable. They lend themselves to distributed democratic sorts of action at the local scale, all over the world. Very few places don't want or can't grow trees. And they're essential to hospitable public space. I've read that Canadian ecologist, whose name I can't think of right now, David Suzuki, says we have three basic needs as humans. The first two are connecting and sharing, human to human, and they happen so well in Ava's term, kissing, if you will. They happen so well in good public spaces. To end, there are a few open, unresolved geopolitical issues. That could be a problem. It's not clear that climate zone, in what climate zones UHI will mobilize the most action, and in what cities and cultures other issues may be more galvanic. In Asia, certainly air and water pollution are more visible incentives, traffic congestion also. In Africa, it may be clean water. Cities like Stockholm, which are cool, may not rally to this strategy. They may welcome a little UHI and have to find other motivators. But most cities, heat is becoming a problem. Albedo enhancement and reforestation are, to quote Brian Stone, who I think has written the best book on the subject, are the single most effective option available to cities to counteract the very real threats of climate change during the next half century. None is more effective and less energy intensive than planting trees. And by the way, the Kyoto Protocol doesn't mention albedo once. It's all about greenhouse reduction. The next agreements have to deal with albedo. Urban heat island mitigation will be especially effective and more appealing in the hotter climates, as I've said, where public spaces will become more and more inhospitable. It's concrete, literally and figuratively, as an initiative. You can feel it, you can be part of it. It's a great sense of progress, much more so than the uncertainties and vagaries of the unfurling climate disruption caused by CC. And happily, working on one is working on the other. What could be better? It's essential if cities with their smaller eco footprints per capita, which we want, are to attract and retain more residents. It will tend to decrease climate change, which will make both cities. By the way, when you decrease climate change, you make the countryside cooler too. So it's working for your neighbors in the countryside as well as your fellow urban residents. It's on the right side of so many ledgers, including public space. Thank you.